the Nokuse section of the Florida Trail is where this blue dot is here. Hopefully everyone's seeing my screen. Speak up if you're not. It's just northwest of Panama City. It's about a 4-hour trip from Jacksonville. It's a beautiful area. There's a lot to see out in the Panhandle. So I know a lot of us go camping south of us, but it's a little bit further, but it's worth the drive to get out to the Panhandle. We'll talk about that in a minute. Well, here's what I'm talking about. There's three sections that are very close to each other on the Florida Trail that are just great hikes. And the first is Econ Fina. I haven't presented on that one yet. The other one towards the western end is the Eglin Air Force Base, and that's a really gorgeous hike. We have had a presentation on that section of the Florida Trail. And then there's the one I'm talking about tonight, which I'm calling Nokuse. It's actually 3 different sections I'm going to talk about under that Nokuse umbrella. But as you can see, these are contiguous, so you can get in, you know, like 10 days of hiking through here without ever seeing a road or just a very minimal road walk. And then from Econ Fina to Nokuse is maybe, you know, 12 miles of road walk. So there's a lot of hiking here, a lot of wilderness, and really pretty areas you'll see as we go through this presentation. So here's a little overview of kind of a route plan or a hike plan and camping that we could do. Actually, I did this in 2 different hikes. And so what I added on was this pine log section, which is Pine Log State Park. And then I added that on to this Nokuse hike that I did. I did the pine log as a kind of a tail end of another hike when we were hiking Econ Fina. But it really dovetails nicely with the Econ Fina. So we really have these 3 sections that we're looking at, which is Pine Log State Forest. And we have this red line here, which is called the Choctawatchee River section, or CRS as they call it out there. And so that's right along this really powerful river called the Choctawhatchee River. And so it's going through the floodplain of that river. And then you have the rest of the section, which is all known as Nokuse, and I'll talk about what that is in a minute. And so just a look at the daily mileage here, just going through that Pine Log section, it's about 9 miles. And Calford Landing is kind of a boat ramp there on State Road 20. And so it's a great place to park your car. If you want to leave a car for a few days, you just park under the bridge, no one bothers you. And so there's a little bit of road walk getting across that bridge, but then you're back into the forest on this Choctawatchee River section. And so there's about 8 miles the first day there. Then a second day, getting the next camp is about 7.8 miles. And another 7.8 miles getting to the next camp. And then getting right back up to that beginning of that Eglin section is another 7 miles or so. So it's a nice 5-day, real hefty hike, you know, with a lot of good mileage. So it's just I really recommend getting out there and seeing this area. Okay, let's talk about what is Nokuse. Nokuse is the Muskogee word for black bear, which is the umbrella species of this area. And the plantation is the largest privately owned nature preserve in the southeastern United States. And as a fellow named M.C. Davis, was a self-made man and had a private fortune and got converted to the environmental movement and became a passionate defender of habitat and wildlife and decided to put his money where his mouth is. And he bought up this old timberland here in the Panhandle, 54,000 acres, and established this nature preserve. And it's now the largest privately owned nature preserve in the southeastern United States. So this is all private land. He manages it, or his foundation does. And the purpose is to restore the longleaf pine forest. Now, many of you know, some of you don't, this is sort of the virgin forest of the southeastern United States. This is a massive ecosystem that used to span 40 million acres between Virginia and Texas. And it was kind of your dominant forest in this area. And it's just a beautiful habitat. And it was completely lost. Only 2% of that forest exists today. And why did it go away? Well, at the time, which is the early 1800s, this pine was prized for naval supplies to create masts on ships. And then the sap was used for waterproofing the ships. It was boiled down to provide turpentine, to provide waterproofing, but also fuel for lamps. It was a very desirable commodity. And it appeared to the people living at that time in the area that it was endless. I mean, it was this huge, huge forest. And they just thought they'd never run out. They just kept clear cutting all these the longleaf pines and used them for their naval supplies, and kept working their way down to Florida and just wiped out this forest. And so MC Davis, amongst other people, including the state park system, state forest system, is trying to restore our original longleaf pine forest habitat. And so that was the main purpose of this preserve. And you'll see as we go through the tour here and you see the pictures, how the pine is being replanted and the habitat's being restored to support the longleaf pine. Now on that same area and that same preserve, he also established a research center and a teaching center that he named the E.O. Wilson Biophilia Center. E.O. Wilson was a famous naturalist, and he was one of MC Davis's personal heroes. And so he founded this in 2009. And it's on the plantation there. It's on State Road 20 as you drive alongside of that area where we're going to be hiking. And biophilia stands for, means love of all living things, which I think is just a beautiful word. I think all of us on the call tonight can think of ourselves as biophiliacs. We're lovers of all living things. And so, as I mentioned, the purpose of the preserve was to restore and preserve the longleaf pine forest. The purpose of the Biophilia Center is to educate on the importance of biodiversity. And they have this really great educational program for 5 school districts in the area. And they bring the school kids in, elementary and middle schoolers, in to have, on-site presentations and educational sessions on ecology and biology of the area. They serve over 6,000 students in these 5 counties. And they also have a residential program, sort of a summer camp, 3-day summer camp type thing, where students from other areas of Florida or other areas of the country can come in and stay in their cabins and participate in this naturalist outdoors program. So it's just a really wonderful center right in the middle of the Panhandle. So let's start our hike here. Go back. So what I did is I started this at the Pine Log State Forest. And the Pine Log State Forest is a really gorgeous state park. You can get a sense from these pictures, but it really don't tell the story. This center here, this lake where they have the main RV camping area, is just so peaceful. You just sit out on these benches and look over this little pond, this little lake here, and it's just idyllic. I mean, it's just a beautiful, beautiful state park. And so we started here. They have primitive camping as well, which is kind of what we like. And so we kind of went down the road a piece and picked out a primitive camp for ourselves, so to set up a base camp here to start our long hike. And so as you can see, there's a couple benches, a picnic table, a nice fire ring. It's right next to one of the beautiful streams that goes through the forest. And so that was a really nice camping spot. We were able to park there securely. Where we started the hike is kind of a little just right off the side of the road. So it's not a great place to leave your car. So it's a really great base camp to start exploring this area from. So we did then just take our cars and leave a car for the day over at the beginning of this state forest and State Park rather, and where the Florida Trail begins there, just kind of this little dirt road just right off of State Road 20 where it turns the bend there, and goes under a power line for a little while, and then soon you're in this very damp, boggy area known as a tie-tie swamp. Now these really skinny trees that are really thick brush here, that's tie-tie, and it's just almost impenetrable. They do a good job maintaining it. This Florida Trail is maintained completely by volunteers, and I've done some of this maintenance work. It's really tough. There's like tons of little branches coming through here and little roots, and just they do a good job keeping this clear, because this will just grow in so thick, these little tie-tie trees. And then it got some really wet areas, and they have nice boardwalks they provided through there, so you can try and keep your feet dry as much as possible. And that's the first habitat that you really encounter in here. It's a very wet, boggy lowland, and that's what supports this tie-tie vegetation. Then you get up into a little higher elevation, and you're along pine flatwoods, and some beautiful open canopy, low-lying vegetation underneath. And this is like a classic pine flatwood. It's just a really nice open hike with a little bit of shade, but just a nice open vista. And pretty soon you come out to a major road. Before you cross that road, there's a little sign here, as you can see. Part of the Florida Trail goes along this historic military road, which is known as Captain Birch's Trail. And during the 1820s, this captain surveyed and directed the construction of the first American road in Florida, which is now known as was known as historic, as the military road or federal road. And it went from Pensacola to St. Augustine. And then at that time, in the early 1800s, when the United States acquired Florida, St. Augustine was the main town on the East Coast. It was the capital of East Florida, and Pensacola was the capital of West Florida. And that was a legacy of the Spanish, who, as you know, were in St. Augustine and founded St. Augustine. So Jacksonville really wasn't as big a deal back in the 1820s. And so this road was actually a road originally back with the Spanish. They made their own Spanish road between Pensacola and St. Augustine, and a lot of this road was just developed on top of that road. Follows that same route. But that's kind of cool to be walking along this old road that's been around there for a couple hundred years. Okay, and then as you go back towards the place where I started you out, you'll pass the lake where we showed you the benches and where the primitive camping is. And so you go past that a little bit, and then you come into a completely different habitat, which are cypress ponds. And they're just, again, just really wide expanse of beautiful cypress trees as far as you can see, and just growing in this, very damp, low-lying ponds or swamps. And it's quite pretty. And you're walking along that for several miles. And then you go through a little neighborhood at the western end of the park. And then you're back up onto State Road 20 for about a mile as you cross the Choctawatchee River. And it's a big river, so you got to share that big bridge with all the cars. But then soon you're off of that road and you're back into the woods, and then you're now into that Choctawatchee River section. And so you're walking along the Choctawatchee River, but there's all these creeks. So if I put together this presentation and showed you a picture of every single creek that I have a picture of that we crossed during this hike, it would be another 15 slides long. They're just every couple miles, you'll come across one of these beautiful creeks. They're all a little different. They all have different bridges. This is the first one you come to. It's called Cypress Creek, and it's definitely full of cypress. You can see the beginning, all these cypress trees, and this nice little boardwalk bridge that goes across. It's quite extensive. There's quite a wide creek here, a lot of black water, and the beautiful cypress trees and the cypress knees thick, and as far as you can see, you know, you see these cypress, and it's kind of a real picturesque little area to cross there. And out of that Cypress Creek low-lying area, you come into a prairie. This is a dry prairie with the native grasses, and that's quite different too. So you're walking through grasslands for another couple miles, and then you come up on a much deeper and more open pond, which again is bordered by cypress. And the road that you're on, which is the trail, crosses this culvert, which is draining that pond. But when we came, something had washed out the culvert and the entire road. So this is supposed to be solid land here, where I'm pointing with my pointer, and it had been totally taken out by some flood or something. So we had to kind of pick our way along the side of this thing and jump the creek, feeding that pond, and just barely got over to the other side there. So there's always a little adventure getting out on the Florida Trail. So then this first night camp, it's called the River's Bend. And it's basic primitive camping, nice little clear area with a nice bench, little fire ring, beautiful sunset. Next day, you're up and you're walking along, they call it five rivers. And there's a, oops. Let me get rid of this thing here. Huh. I don't know if you guys have this, but all right, we'll do it that way. Sorry, I have some controls that are blocking that headline. I don't know if that is something you saw. In any case, this is one of those rivers called the Big Head Branch. It's a nice wide creek, and you're walking along this branch for quite a while. And then you come to Boggy Head Creek. Again, a lot of creeks, and a lot of these dip down. So you'll have a little bit of a hilly terrain here, which is unusual in Florida. It's a good workout. You know, you're going up and down a little bit more than you would on some of the other areas in Central Florida, for example. And then you come out into another big open pine flatwoods, and you can see all the very open canopy and the grass is underneath. And then there's this funny contraption, and this is an old irrigation machine that used to be in this area when it was a sod farm. So before it was bought out, part of this acreage was a commercial sod farm. And when Mr. Davis bought the property, he just left these irrigation machines there and planted the trees all around them. So you've got this pine forest in the middle of it. There's this irrigation machine here. And there's two of them, one on either end. They're huge. So from there, you go up a little bit in elevation, and we're in what's called a sandhill. The sandhill environment is, as the name implies, very sandy and dry. And it's just almost like being at the beach, except for a very light cover of grass and then the low-lying vegetation on it. And the sandhill was one of the habitats that supported the longleaf pine back in the day. And as you can see, these little clumps here, these are all baby longleaf pine trees that have been planted in this area to, again, restore the habitat, restore the community of longleaf pines. And this here is a little prickly pear. You can see the red fruits. This is the favorite food of the gopher tortoise, who is one of the keystone species of the sandhill. They dig these burrows. Maybe you've seen those. Maybe you've seen those gopher tortoises out there. And so these burrows support another 300 species who live in that burrow along with the gopher tortoise in a commensal parasitic environment. Another creek, Black Creek, and on that creek we found this little plant. If you can see on the right-hand picture there, that is a carnivorous plant called a pitcher plant, and they live in very difficult environment with not a lot of nutrients, and so they are forced to gain their nutrients from animal life and not from the minerals in their environment. So that is a carnivorous pitcher plant. And we have another campsite here. Again, very simple, with a fire ring and a bench, Forgotten Creek Camp. And then we enter a very low-lying swampland. So we're going from this high, dry, high pine sandhill community, and then we descend down a ravine, and we end up in this boggy creek for like 3 miles. This is the very, very difficult terrain. You're walking through, probably good chance you'll be getting your feet wet. Trying to avoid getting your feet wet is tough. You're jumping from one clump to another of these just little outcrops of soil, or else from these stumps, from these cypress trees. So it's really tricky footing, easy to fall down, need your poles to go through this. Then you come out and you're got up in elevation again, and you're up on top of another sandhill or nice flatwoods, and that is a beautiful restoration area where they're bringing back, there's a lot of planting, as you can see, bringing back these longleaf pines. And here's the campground. I camped right next to the restored forest, a little kiosk with information. And as you go through, you'll see probably 3 or 4 what are called steepheads. And these are pretty specialized ravines that are kind of specialized to Florida. They happen because of seepage coming out of the side of the slope that slowly erodes the bottom of the slope, and then the sand that's on top of the slope collapses in. So it continually widens this, and it's formed differently than, say, like up in the Northeast, where you have a lot of rainwater that then erodes from the top. This is sort of eroding from the bottom. So they're called steepheads, and they can get quite steep. You can see the top, it's hard to see this as, elevation, but if you look from that bridge up to where the sky appears, you can see that that's pretty high. So these are 60, 70 feet deep, a lot of them. And it's a very curious phenomenon that you don't see too much, definitely not outside of Florida. So Ravine Garden State Park is another good example of steepheads that are here in this area down in Palatka. And then you reach the end of that Nokuse section, and then you cross US 331, and then there's a beautiful trail going up to the beginning of the Eglin section. And so this is a nice forested trail. You don't have to go along the road. And then you end up at Eglin, and that's where I will leave you for tonight. And so that's the Nokuse section.